So today I'm going to be redoing one of my old videos and really revamping it, and it's really just about swapping out Deidara with other Akatsuki members when he went on to go try to capture Gaara. And I'm just doing this because I feel like some of my opinions have evolved since then, and I wanted to kind of give an update. But I'm doing this with TG, so TG will be adding a fresh perspective, and I'm also going to be adding a few Akatsuki members as well to keep it more fresh. So I'll let TG introduce himself.
What's going on, guys? TG or Thunder God here today. We're talking about Gaara. Now, Gaara is very interesting at this stage in the story because his strength changes dramatically from the Five Kage Summit arc to the War arc. Now, some people have made some assumptions on why this might be. My little narrative for why maybe Gaara perceived or like got stronger and has these radical amps is because losing Shikaku actually allowed him to sleep more. At the timing of this little what if, Gaara and Shikaku are not cool. They're not friendly, and you could maybe infer that Gaara is continuously losing sleep. Whereas when he loses Shikaku, he's able to rest up a lot more and have a dramatic strength increase because of it. That's my little, why that might be the case. And it's also my little point on why Gaara is not going to be able to replicate the feats he does later on in part two. So we have to address that just so people don't go up, well, he did this in the Five Kage Summit or he did this in the War Arc. Those feats are not indicative of this Gaara, and there seems to be like a decent explanation for why he does replicate better feats.
Yeah, and I guess just the last thing we need to do before we start talking about the members is that just the conditions. So basically, they're going to have the same conditions as Deidara. So when Deidara came in, Sasori had a spy kill all the guards at the gate. So we'll say that the guards are dealt with as well. And then their goal will be to infiltrate the village and preferably, take Gaara by surprise if they can. Now the thing is, this likely won't happen because Gaara was able to hear Deidara's explosives just land on the roof, and even before they exploded, he knew there was an intruder. So it's going to be very hard for any of them to get in the center of the village, get past probably a bunch of guards without Gaara noticing. Now there is one member that probably can do it, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So let's just go ahead and start off with our first member, Hidan, and he's never cleared a win condition in any of these, and I'll let TG explain why.
Dude, verbatim, the slowest member. The fact that Deidara got tagged in this matchup at all means that Hidan is definitely getting tagged, and he's gonna have a worse time in this matchup. If he's not able to scratch Kakashi, we've never really seen the only time where he's able to effectively use his ability is against people who are close range fighters like him and have no intel. Gaara's realistically going to be nowhere near Hidan this entire matchup. So there's just no real way you can make the argument that Hidan would get any drops of Gaara's blood.
Yeah, it's kind of bottom line. Like if he can't scratch Kakashi with Kakazu's help, Gaara is supposed to have an ultimate defense. So there's not much more to say. They are more than likely Gaara's just going to cover him with sand, and that's going to be it. But we can go ahead and start with the first interesting member, and that's Kakuzu. Now Kakuzu, the thing about him is that he kind of has unknown limits when it comes to durability and strength. So we did see, when we first see him, he's able to briefly hold up the Two Tails when the Two Tails tries to stomp on him. And he does get stomped on, but then he goes on to beat the Two Tails with Hidan. And he doesn't even look that scuffed up, afterwards. So very impressive by him. But then that's really, when it comes to strength, we don't know quite the limits of what he's able to do along with his durability, because he does have a earth release jutsu that hardens his skin and makes him much more durable. Wouldn't you agree, CJ?
Yeah, the Earth style jutsu, it's very potent. It's somewhat similar to Kimimaru's bone defense almost. We're gonna talk about that in a second. It's very potent. He's really just a boxer. It's a strong earth release, and the only real way it was actually overcome in the show was that they had Kakashi's Raikiri go through Kakuzu's back, which kind of talks about the elemental side of this matchup where it does make a difference. A lot of people in these versus battles don't talk about the elemental matchups, and I understand it to a degree because certain elemental matchups potency of the technique does matter. But at the same time, it makes a difference. So it's just, it's a very potent technique. And it kind of begs the question, what if Gaara just kind of sand coffined him? Would he be able to just kind of Star Platinum, just order his way out of it? through, just start breaking the sand with it. Which there can be a case to be made. We've seen something similar in the show with Kimimaro. Do you want to like talk about this for a second?
Yeah, so when Kimimaro was like deathly sick, when he's fighting Gaara, his bones and like Herstmark's stages are so strong that he's able to resist like giant sand barrels that cover the entire forest, and not only resist it, but actually like escape like that much sand and keep on fighting. We do know that he's able to take the like forces from the Two Tails and still go on and keep fighting fine, basically. So it's kind of a question
Yeah.
of like maybe if he does get like some massive sand barrel around him, he may be able to just get out of it. And then of course, we did see that he was penetrated by Kakashi's lightning style, but this is because of the elemental weakness, right? Like I don't think Kakashi's Chidori is stronger than like the Two Tails trying to stomp on you. Is that's how important the elemental weakness can be. And then
Yeah.
also like we see Kakuzu's own lightning style was strong enough that when Kakashi was trying to absorb it with his own lightning style, it would like burnt off his gloves and made his hands all red.
Yeah, it's implied they're like, obviously, like you have to output a greater lightning release to cancel it out, but it's implied like it's comparable if it's like physically damaging Kakashi to that extent. There has to be somewhat comparable, or else Kakashi would just absolutely neg it, and that kind of plays into this matchup because if you make the case like it's somewhat comparable, it's gonna be fantastic in this matchup against Gaara because he's just gonna have like right on shooting out and like and keep in mind these aren't small scale like lightning style attacks. They are very large. Like the wind style and fire style attacks were just like changing the scenery completely. So it's going to be very potent. They have a large like area of spread, and this just allows Kakuzu to supplement his own like physical dexterity with the lightning release weakening Gaara's sand. It's going to be very tough for Gaara to deal with this. And this isn't even talking about the additional hearts that might come into play. Do you want to like talk about that for a sec?
Yeah, so when he can use his mask, right? We did see that when Deidara fought Gaara in the original timeline, he drops a C3 to like divert all of his sand, and that allows for Deidara to use the attack that beat Gaara. It's possible that Kakuzu could like just spread out some of his hearts and like just wreak havoc on the village, and that'll cause Gaara to divert some of his sand, some of his attention, and that'll make the one-on-one easier as well. And it's gonna mean like he has less sand to defend himself. And then also like when it comes to just like I guess his raw strength, it may be possible that like if his strength is comparable to like the Two Tails, possibly he could just like punch through Gaara's sand, right? As we did see
Yeah.
like in the Kimimaru fight, Kimimaru just straight ran through like a sand barrier that Gaara put up. So that's also a possibility. Any other thoughts on this fight, TJ?
No, I definitely agree. Like he's got a lot of physical dexterity. And he's able to distract Gara as well. It's not limited to just pure offense. He has the ability to just, create distractions, which obviously we know was a big issue for Gara in his fight with Deidara. So I think that pretty much sums up the Kakuzu matchup.
Yeah, I guess just like my final thoughts are is like I do lean towards Kakuzu
Yeah.
for the most part, but I do think it's possible with that much sand. It's possible that Gaara can like defend himself well enough, or he could just. It is also possible that he could use a sand barrel, and maybe that's too much as well. But overall, we both lean towards Kakuzu winning. Next is Sasori, and of course, me and TG were kind of talking about how toxic it can be with the third Kazekage stuff.
So, like, and this has always been like my issue with because I'm sure a lot of people who are like in the community are like the third Kazekage stuff and how it like branches out into later war arc stuff. I'm not covering that here, but it all pretty much stems off the fact that Sasori, kills the third Kazekage. However, the issue is the details of this encounter are unclear. We don't know if there was a fight that took place. We Sasori, like you could make a case like yeah they fought, but just as easily you could say like Sasori poisoned him and caught him off guard. Like there's no real way to assert like which way the fight went.
I lean towards him having being poisoned because it was the Sand Village had no idea what happened to him, and if they
Yeah,
fought, you would think there would be some type of ruckus, right? And it's unlikely that the Kazekage like ever left the village, right? Other than like for a Kage summit or something. But
yeah,
anyway, one important thing we need to bring up was that Sasori is not going to be afraid to use poison here because if he's prepared to like capture Jinchuriki, he could easily prepare an antidote for the Jinchuriki. Like Sakura was able to study the poison and create an antidote. Chio tried to create an antidote. She wasn't good enough though. So if another puppet user has thought about, crafting an antidote, Sasori should be able to do so easily since it's his poison that he manufactured.
Yeah, yeah. There's no. He even talks about, just to add on to what you're saying. He talks about how different, like difficult it is to balance like the pH with his antidote. So he has full, like it even takes him a while to make the antidote. So for him to be hunting Jinchuriki and to have everything coated with poison, it wouldn't, it really wouldn't make too much sense for him like not have an antidote on him at like all times. It just wouldn't. It wouldn't be indicative, or else he would be risking the Jinchuriki's lives. In which case, if they die, the Bijou just resurrects, and the whole effort was for nothing.
Yeah, so I guess now we can kind of talk about like how Gaara does or how Sasori does against Gaara's sand. So of course, Sasori does have the iron sand. Now he can't use as much sand as Gaara in this situation. He definitely has the superior sand, as we know that iron sand is magnet release, and Gaara's not even using magnet release by this point. Iron sand is also supposed to be much heavier than Gaara's sand.
Yeah.
So, like, let's say that Gaara starts to try to cover Sasori with sand. It's possible that he can, like, cover himself with iron sand to protect himself, or if he observes that Gaara is using like a sand ball to protect himself, he could do the same with the iron sand. Another thing that should be brought up is that Sasori can only be damaged at one point, and that's his core. And we know that his core is very slippery, and it can jump into other puppets. So it's possible, like if his puppet body starts to get covered, he could slip out his heart and then go into like one of his other puppets or something, and possibly even surprise Gar.
He's just very slippery. Like he's not a conventional fighter because like even, look at it like this. Even if Gaara like rips off a limb, Sasori's not affected. He'll just pop the limb off and he can always grab more. It has to be a complete KO for Sasori, or like Gaara has to hit his core with like pinpoint precision, which we know like even when he's in his fight with Sakura and Chio, they had knowledge of the core and they still didn't, defeat it. Like they didn't have knowledge that that's what they needed to take down. They thought if they took down the main puppet body. So to kind of say like Gar would even like put this together is extremely like difficult to say. So he's hard to take down.
Yeah, and just to switch to the offensive side for Sasori, like he did say that when he used the 100 puppets jutsu, he took down like a small nation with it or like a country. So that's an option here to as like a diversion. Like Deidara uses diversion. If Sasori wants to use 100 puppets, he could spread that through the entire village and just divert all of Gaara's sand away to make like the Gaara have much less sand to protect himself with.
Yeah.
And he can also use the 100 puppets against Gaara as well, because I mean, of course, if Gaara does go into a sandball, that's going to be much tougher for Sasori when it comes to just 100 puppets. But when it comes to the iron sand, as we said earlier, it's superior and it's heavier, so there's not going to be any way for Gaara to block it with his own sand. So if he goes into a sandball and then Sasori shoots iron sand at it, it's just going to cut right through it.
It's described as like the pinnacle of like I guess you could say like the sand techniques, like not sand at least, but like the like the Kazekage who use sand as an offensive weapon. The third Kazekage is talked about like this to be the ultimate sand ninjutsu, above the rest. So it's just like, and if you go off like the whole like that it weighs more than the gold, that weighs more than the regular sand, it's just not too much. Like even if they clashed, Gaara's would just fail, and that's not even discussing what if Sasori's iron sand gets mixed in with Gaara's, how detrimental that could be for Gaara as well. Having poison coated grains of sand like around him at all times. Like there's so many ways this fight could just go bad for Gaara, realistically speaking. All his 100 puppets have weapons coated in poison too, so it's just a big issue.
Yeah, I don't think there's much we need to sum up for it, but we strongly favor Sasori with this, and it's really just
Yeah.
like the third Kazekage puppet. He's got the Iron Sand as superior, and then also he has some ways to deal with sand coffins and whatever. So next, we're going to be doing someone new. We're going to be doing Taka Sasuke, and this is specifically the Sasuke that went to go capture B, since that was like the only real Akatsuki mission he did. And we're also going to say, not many people know this, but like it said after the battle that Sasuke had not fully recovered from his fight against Itachi when he went to go fight B. So we'll say that this is like a 100% Taka Sasuke. So for starters, I'll let TG kind of talk about how they compare against Deidara since they both fought Deidara.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll say this real quick too. This Taka Sasuke would be superior to the heavy Sasuke. Like his eyesight is more enhanced. It's just that, and not a lot of people realize this. His fighting style also changed, and so he is superior in the fact that like his eyesight is powered up, his hatred is amped up, and he's just he's increased. His powers are increasing. But his fighting style does change and stuff like that. And this segues over to Deidara because Sasuke and Gaara actually both fight Deidara, and I've kind of like tuned in on this a little bit on my channel, but there's a big difference in discussing Deidara and his like reactions to a lot of what Gaara does and what Sasuke does. For example, right, I'll paint a little picture. Like Deidara gets his arm torn off by Gaara. He's not very concerned. He's very confident in these scenarios. Whereas like Sasuke, right? Sasuke is consistently able to tag Deidara and like pins him down with kunai and stuff like that. And you can actually see like Deidara's he's physically distressed, so you get a little bit of a semblance in terms of like the type of fighters here. And I'll say this too, Deidara was also able to pretty much like out chess Gaara in their whole matchup. He like was pretty much predicting everything he's gonna do. He's like, you're very predictable in your fighting style. And then here comes Sasuke like out chessing Deidara. So there's a little bit of like a skill and like character like jump up from like Deidara to Sasuke, and like same thing from Gaara to Deidara. So I think like it's pretty clear like Sasuke is consistently tagging Deidara. He's doing well with everything Deidara is throwing at him. Deidara is unleashing many more of his technique. And to top it off, Deidara also had outside help against Sasuke. He had Tobi or Obito planting bombs underground. So I think it does say something to like Sasuke at this point, and like his skill set and his intellect and how he is just as a fighter. To kind of sum it up.
Yeah, and another thing to bring up is that kind of at the end of the fight, Data is like capturing Gaara was the hard part, and you also notice that Data was only using C1s, which is his weakest attack against Gaara, right? So he's definitely pulling his punch against Gaara, and Gaara did manage to like rip off his arm, but when it comes to the Sasuke fight, like Data is very flustered and just exhausted at the end of their fight, right? But
Yeah.
that's enough of like the data stuff. We can talk about how they match up. So of course, first we talk about like how each character does with like sand coffins and sand burials. Now, of course, we do know that Sasuke is very fast and he may be able to just completely evade this. But if he does get caught, he does have lightning style to help him. So like he has Chidori Stream and like Chidori Nagashi. Like he can run Chidori through himself or through the sand around him and just basically weaken it, or he can use Shidori to cut through any sand that tries to start to covering him. And really, I think that's kind of like all he needs to counter that.
Yeah, Sasuke's like lightning style is just ridiculously potent at this point. It's been talked about by a lot of characters. I know it's a layer Sasuke, but you even see it like piercing the Raikage's cloak, which is extremely impressive. The third Raikage taking a Rasen Shuriken, which is actually weak too. So there is like a bit of a narrative, but if you want to get like down to it, it's just you could say like Sasuke's like lightning style or Shidori would be comparable to Kakashi's Raikiri, which we actually like just previously discussed a little bit and how potent that is. So he's just got like at the bare bones, like ignoring all that, he has a very good elemental matchup. He has a plethora of techniques that are very effective against Gaara's that he can use, which just adds into like Sasuke as a fighter and how this is gonna be like he's gonna be in a good starting position with his like arsenal.
Yeah, and I think that just one thing we should bring up briefly is that Amaterasu is more of a last resort at this point because Sasuke's Mangekyo was very undeveloped and he didn't use it until like at the end against B. And even then, like we did see that at the summit, that Gaara was able to just block the flame control and it didn't like just completely melt the sand. So I don't want to get into too much of that because that gets into like Kage Summit stuff. But
Yeah.
Amaterasu likely doesn't come out in this fight, but something that might come out is Genjutsu. And we saw that Sasuke was able to like he was able to paralyze B, and the A tails ended up bailing B out, but that likely won't happen with the one tail since they aren't on friendly terms. Another thing that Sasuke can do is use subtle genjutsu. It's like against Deidara, even though Deidara knows not to make eyesight with the Sharingan, same with Danzo, I'll get to Danzo in a second. Like Deidara is caught under genjutsu several times and thinking that Sasuke had like died, and then Sasuke ends up like surprising him, right? So that's something that can, and then also Danzo was caught under genjutsu and thought that he had one more Izanagi than he did.
Yeah, I mean, the guy who like prepped against Sharingan like Genjutsu specifically got caught in a Sharingan Genjutsu. And then like the guy with Sharingan on his eye and arm got caught by a Sharingan Genjutsu. I feel like that's what like really just needs to be said for like Sasuke's ability to capture people under the subtle or not so subtle Genjutsu. It's just he's a master of it. And people actually like just sleep on Sasuke's Genjutsu, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, and I guess that the last thing we want to talk about is Sasuke's offense, and of course we've talked about his lightning style some, but basically like we know at this point like his lightning, like his Chidori spear can cut through the Eight Tails tail like cleanly, and so we know that Earth is very weak to lightning. So if he tries to use like he doesn't even have to get that close to Gaara if he tries to use a Chidori spear. Now if Gaara picks up on this early and like uses a like gets all the sand he can possibly to protect him. Like Sasuke could also possibly use Kirin, and we've seen Kirin scale to like forcing Itachi to use his own Susanoo and completely destroying the Uchiha hideout. So even with all that sand, more than likely the Kirin would be able to cut through it.
Yeah, it's not very likely that Gaara would be able to defend against it. It's pressuring Itachi to use the Susanoo, and at least the ribcage if you want to make that case. But I'll say this too: Gaara almost has no like choice but to tank it because if he doesn't, it's just gonna get dropped on the village. So it's pretty much like if Sasuke does drop it, Gaara can't react to it, or if he can, he has no choice but to like defend against it. And like at that point, he's just like wasted chakra, whereas Sasuke wasted none. And we see like Gaara's physically fatigued from just maneuvering all that sand, and on top of like maneuvering it, he has to take it back out of the village. He can't just drop it on the villagers. So no matter what, like which way you slice it, Kirin's gonna be effective in this match. But it's very easy for Sasuke to get up in this match.
Yeah, and that's really kind of all we have to say against Sasuke. Like he has ways to get out of sand coffins, and then it's really the lightning style that just makes this like an unfair matchup for Gaara. Like if it wasn't for that, it would probably be much closer. But
Yeah.
next, we're gonna be doing another new character. We're gonna be doing Orochimaru, and this is assuming that Orochimaru like never leaves the Akatsuki, right? And then he's still in the Akatsuki by part two, and they send him to capture Gaara. So this is the one where like he actually has the potential to actually have a successful infiltration, as we did see he did infiltrate the Leaf in part one, and was only caught because he was messing around with Sasuke, really. And so that's because he's able to steal other people's faces. And that's how he's able to pretend to be one of the tuning exam participants. So if Orochimaru wants to take like the long game, like he can just take someone's face that works like near the Okage office or something, and then just surprise Gaara.
He could just get like the mask of an advisor. Maybe he takes like Tamari's face or something like crazy. Yeah, right. Like rip. So yeah, there's a lot of ways like he can actually just approach Gaara and end the fight early. That's a little bit on that. Orochimaru is actually a very good time in this match. Not a very good time, but he has a lot he can do. That's not too many people explore. Off rip, he has the ability to spread snakes along the sand itself. He has that technique he unleashes against Naruto where he shoots out like hundreds to thousands of snakes that just flood the battlefield. In which case, that's going to be an issue that Gaara's obviously going to have to deal with, like his village getting swamped with like minor snakes and stuff like that. He's very similar to a lot of characters where they can just like kind of change the landscape themselves to like suit their arsenals.
Yeah, it's definitely like Deidara was smart to like his C3 was the diversion, and that was able to get the sand out of the way. Like if Orochimaru wants to fight Gaara, and it's going to be very helpful for him if it that diverts all the sand out of the way, because I do think that Orochimaru is going to have a bit of a tough time with his sand defenses.
Yeah, and the thing about Orochimaru is that he's very slippery. He's a very slippery fighter. He has ways to get around Gaara. Like even if for whatever reason, right? If you make the case like Gaara even grabs him, like it's kind of like a Four Tails Naruto situation. He has oral rebirth, where he can just like shoot himself out of his own mouth, and so it's like Gaara has to completely like put him in a sand coffin for this to work. Minor sand attacks are not going to be enough to take out like Orochimaru. Like he'll just rip himself in half and stuff, all this crazy stuff. He's very slippery. It's going to be very tough for Gaara to like. He has to pretty much put his hands on Orochimaru and like keep him subdued completely. He has to almost bring out like a scenario in the original timeline where he like tries to trap Deidara in like a giant sphere or something like that. And even then, Deidara escapes, so it's kind of like it's a little questionable.
With the oral rebirth, even if he's like in a really bad spot, he can extend his neck out and then do oral rebirth. We saw him do that after the fight with four-tailed Naruto, and that's like a way that he can save himself. And even if he does manage, or like Gaara manages to rip off an arm like he did with Deidara, if he does Oral Rebirth, it just regenerates that arm basically. So there's a lot of ways that Orochimaru can deal with the sand defensively. Now, when it comes to offensively, I don't think he does as well, but I do think he has some options. So, of course, he can summon Manda and work alongside with them because we know that like Orochimaru is kind of supposed to be the boss of Manda, and so if they're both working together, even though Gaara's sand is very well suited to deal with like giant monsters or whatever, if he's working against both Orochimaru and Manda and possibly all the small snakes, like he might be spread too thin. And then TG also brought up like some good points with his wind style possibly.
Yeah, there's a bit of and not too many people talk about like Orochimaru's win style. I guess just because Kishimoto didn't make it a point, but it's like discussed in a whole bunch of media. He actually does do it in the tuning exams against Sasuke. It's the wind release, like giant breakthrough. They don't name it that in the actual like, translations, but discussed as that in the data book. Regardless, he does have access to the wind style, and he actually might have like his wind style boosted because the whole deal with the Sand Village because like the desert winds are so strong. So you see the wind style with a lot of people from the sand as it's their village specialty. You see this with Baki, he's creating the wind style swords. You see this with Tamari with her giant fan. Even when they're attacking like the Jubi, there's a ton of like people from the sand village with fans. So the village in the sands is known for this. This could be because like the environment and the landscape itself is suited to their ninjutsu, so it makes it easier to defend across. However, this would work in the favor of Orochimaru, who could just have it amp his own style. So it is something to note. Orochimaru doesn't do it too much. He does it in other media, but it's just something we figured to like throw out there as he has access to stuff that boosts him from the landscape as well.
Yeah, and just like one more final point to bring up is like he does have his Hydra transformation, which he tried to use against Itachi, and the Hydra transformation is supposed to be like his ultimate form, right? So if he tries to go Hydra transformation, works alongside Manda, and with all the snakes, small snakes, like it's just going to be too much for Guard to deal with, really, in my opinion, and it's going to be able to break through his defenses. So, I mean, really, all in all, like we both agree that infiltrating and surprising Gara is a option. He has ways to deal with sand coffins, and then I don't think that he has as good of ways to like deal with this or get through Gara's defenses. But I don't really see Gara getting through Orochimaru's defenses. So we both agree that Orochimaru should take this one, and then next we'll talk about Kisame, and I'll let TG start with that.
So the thing about Kisame, and he's very similar to Orochimaru, and this dude can literally change the landscape to suit his desire. Even a 30% clone that was fighting Might Guy completely changed like a dry land into a flood area, like it seemed like an ocean. Like the water was extremely deep. It was outlandish for him to create this much water, right?
Yeah.
So he would actually be able to flood the village, and this would accomplish two things. It would make Gaara distracted, and it would only aid Kisame as he can just hide underwater and just take out Shinobi or just use the water to his advantage, throw out additional jutsu.
Yeah, I definitely think that I know that Kisame and Gara, I do see like people talk about this because it is interesting with the water versus the sand. But the thing is, like, if he does flood the village, that just starts like an immediate crisis for Gara. And
Yeah.
then when it comes to dealing with the sand, like if he starts to get covered with it, he could go underwater, and that'll be able to escape the sand because the sand will be much slower in it. And then with like other things, like even if Kisame is starts to get covered with the sand, he has Samihara, and if Samihara absorbs the chakra in the sand, then Gara can't control it anymore, right? And then also, if somehow he gets Samihara away, it's possible that Kisame just tanks through like a giant sand barrel because like we saw that he took a Hiradora and ended up living, and we also saw that this Seven Gates Hiradora was able to just bat around Madara's full body Susanoo. So
Yeah.
it's just like there's not really anything Gara can do to deal with Kisame's defensive tactics, and then also like Kisame can just use Samihara to absorb the chakra out of Gara's sandball, and then Gara's exposed, or he can use like a water shark bomb to throw at Gara, and that absorbs a Jutsu's chakra. So there's not really any way for Gara to defend himself against, and he's just going to try to put up sand. That's going to fail, and then Kisame's going to hit him.
Yeah, it's honestly it's just it's a tough matchup for Gaara.
Yeah, and it's like even though even though the Earth style is supposed to be strong or superior to Water style, it's just like Kisame has so many good ways to deal with it, especially with his chakra absorption. Which I guess I guess we both just agree Kisame should definitely have this, and this leaves us with the big three: Itachi, Pain, and Obito. And I don't even. I'll let TG kind of explain what happens here.
A, we're not insulting anybody's intelligence by like saying this. I don't think it's, bro. Come on, like stop it. You know what I'm saying? The thing about Itachi, Pain, and Obito, and this is like, it's not the issue with throwing them in these matchups, but like the problem is they're legitimately too strong. All three are more so like these like a certain tier of power, like narratively speaking, like Itachi and Pain are like these like points, like these antagonists for Naruto and Sasuke, and then like Obito is like the same thing. It's just, Obito's like someone like, oh, Minato's like, you need the Nine Tails chakra to face him. He's even stronger than Pain. And then you like they're all discussed in the same way. They're all just these forces of nature that like require like platoons of shinobi to like even figure out their abilities and attempt anything against like the statements surrounding them. Like for example, these guys were trying to fight Itachi. They had like a squad of 12 members just to find one Akatsuki member. It's like they were not ready for that. These three are just narratively like on a different tier. There's not too much need to talk about them. I don't think anybody's gonna answer that. Obviously, it's disrespectful for us to even like bring that up to you guys, because like, what do you want us to say? Obito like phases through sand, like what? Like, what do you want from us? Come on. Anyway, not my fault. I'm getting excited.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of wrap up the video, like I guess that there were a lot of interesting matchups in this. It was an interesting video, but I guess Gaara lost most of them except for like Hidan. Maybe he has a chance against Kakuzu as well. And I guess we're not like shitting on Gaara or anything, but it's just with the Akatsuki, like they're just kind of like a step above generally. Like I guess that's really all I have to say. You got anything to say, TG?
Nah, man, just you hit that like button. We're here. We're here. I'm just, I'm horrible at outros. Nah, thank you guys for watching. Thank you, New Horizons, for having me. I think we summed it up very well.
Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos in the future. Comment something if you have something to say. And thank y'all for watching. I guess I'll see y'all next time.